Something happened to me the other day when I was rewatching Elvis in Jailhouse Rock. And the thing that happened to me is the thing about Elvis Presley that no one warns you about. You think you know how you're going to feel, and then you watch him and you don't. And usually what you feel is something so electric that it can't ever fully be explained. And then I watched King Creole, and that's when the feeling changed from a feeling of warmth into something that genuinely ached, because I understood by then that what I was watching was also a story of something that was taken. Something that was taken from Elvis and something that was taken from us, the audience and the fans. This is that story, and like all good stories, this story has a horrible villain. Hello, if you're new here, my name is Cassidy Krieger. Hollywoodland Photos is a place for everything vintage, old Hollywood, and everything in between. I love talking about pop culture and things that mattered in the 20th century. And I also am a new Elvis fan. So if you love Elvis and old Hollywood and pop culture and anything, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I will be very, very thankful. When Elvis Presley first appeared on the big screen in 1956 in Love Me Tender, you could see his raw talent and his screen presence. He was Elvis. Of course, he had all of that in spades. But you could also see someone that was still growing. He was only 21 years old. He was a baby, and the camera was a very new thing to him. He was aware of it, and you could see it in this film. You could feel him feeling it. The line readings are considered a little stiff, the words landing with the weight of someone who knows he is acting. His body carries the same self-consciousness, which is really hard to move and be spirited and free in front of the camera when you're feeling a little bit like the camera's on you. But by Jailhouse Rock, just a year later, that self-consciousness was gone. And when you watch both these films back to back, you can measure the distance of how much he had improved as an actor and how much he must have grown as a human being. The line delivery is looser, more conversational. He stopped announcing the dialogue and started saying it. His body language follows. He's easier, more natural, occupying space without thinking about occupying that space. And perhaps most tellingly, he's learned the hardest thing any screen actor has to learn. And believe me, I've trained as a screen actor all my life. When not to react, when to be still, and when to let the other person speak and just exist in the frame and listen to them. That is not a beginner's skill, and that is not something you just stumble into. That is an actor who has been watching, absorbing, working, studying, and who is getting genuinely, rapidly, visibly better. And what I kept noticing mostly when I watched that film was his body, the confidence of it. He wasn't performing for the camera, he was just existing in front of the camera. And I thought a lot to myself about why I felt something deeper to Elvis in this film, and I think it's because confidence like that, real confidence, not performed confidence, is rare in any era of film. You can't manufacture it and you can't fake it on screen. He had it at 22 years old. He was 22 and it was only going to get sharper. After Jailhouse Rock came King Creole, and this is kind of like the movie that I'm basing my argument on, because what had been instinct in Jailhouse Rock became something else entirely in King Creole. The role of Danny Fisher, a young man in New Orleans pulled between decency and the criminal world pressing in around him, was originally written for James Dean. But, of course, we know that James Dean died in a car accident in 1955, and the part was then rewritten for Elvis. Michael Curtis, who directed King Creole, was a really great director. He had made Casablanca. Say no more. And Curtis expected Elvis to be the usual kind of young, famous man who was a combination of fame, but a combination of limitation. But he later described Elvis as a lovely boy who was going to be a very wonderful actor. Howard Thompson in the New York Times wrote 4 words that should have been the beginning of something for Elvis. Elvis Presley can act. Variety called him surprisingly sympathetic and believable. And Elvis himself named Danny Fisher his favourite role of his entire career. Not his most successful, but his most favourite. He told producer Hal Willis directly in 1956, "My ambition has always been to become a motion picture actor. A good one, sir." Watching this film after Jailhouse Rock, you can feel the trajectory, the arc of someone who is getting better, film by film, and who knows it. He had the instincts, he had the desire, and he had in those 2 films the proof. And then the army called, and by the time he came back, somebody else had already decided what the rest of his career would look like. His original induction date was in January, but the film was considered significant enough to cause a delay. So 2 weeks after filming wrapped, on March 24th, 1958, Elvis Presley was inducted into the United States Army. He served 2 years, and when he came back, the world had shifted around him. The Beatles were rising, rock and roll was changing shape, and the cultural moment was moving on, as it always does. But more than any of that, the man who managed Elvis's career had been planning Elvis's return, and that plan had nothing to do with acting. So let's talk about Colonel Tom Parker, because he was not a colonel. He was not even an American citizen. He was a Dutch-born carnival barker who had invented himself entirely, and who managed Elvis Presley with absolute and complete suffocating control. An assistant, Byron Raphael, who worked alongside Parker for a bit, was later explicit about one thing. The only criticism I ever heard the Colonel make of Elvis was about his acting. He never believed that Elvis was going to be an actor, not for a second. Parker's attitude towards serious film work was not indifference, it was contempt. When approached in 1964 about a role that might have earned Elvis an Oscar nomination, Parker's response, as reported in Variety, was this: "Pay us our regular fee, and if Elvis gets the Oscar, we'll give him his money back." He thought it was a joke. He thought the entire ambition was a joke. The contracts Parker negotiated reflected this contempt. Once a deal was signed, the studio had complete control over the cast, the script, the production. The Presley camp had no creative say whatsoever, and Parker did not push for better material. He pushed for maximum upfront payment and minimum friction. And friction meant artistic demands. Artistic demands cost money and time, and Parker eliminated them. Over the course of his film career, Elvis made 31 feature films between 1956 and 1969. The formula that emerged after Blue Hawaii in 1961 drove the majority of them: musical comedies, interchangeable plots, and songs written to fill a quota rather than serve a story. Blue Hawaii made $4.2 million at the box office, but by 1968, Speedway had only made $2 million. The audience was leaving, and the formula was exhausted. Of course it was. You get sick of watching the same film over and over again, just like Elvis got sick of making them. And it's worth pausing here, because the argument is not that every film was a catastrophe. Ray Connolly, in his book Being Elvis, which I just read and loved, is careful to make this distinction. Of Viva Las Vegas, he writes that it was one of Elvis's better movies, and it really was. I really enjoy Viva Las Vegas. It's such a good movie. It was a proper musical directed by George Sidney, a genuine Hollywood professional who had made Annie Get Your Gun and Showboat, so he was making good musicals. And the chemistry, of course, the chemistry between Elvis and Anne-Margaret was so real. It was not manufactured for the cameras, it was genuinely real. The two began an affair during filming, which Priscilla Presley writes about in her memoir, Elvis and Me. Anne-Margaret, for her part, has spoken about Elvis throughout her life in terms that go far beyond co-star warmth. She's called him her soulmate. And you can feel it on screen, that ease, that spark. It isn't acting. Acting's good, but there's always something more when there's chemistry on screen, and they had it. And this points to something that the formula films tried to consistently bury. Elvis was capable of profound human connection. He had emotional depth, genuine feeling, and real access to something interior. The right material with the right director might have drawn that out of him in ways that would have been extraordinary to watch. And while I might be in my Elvis Presley era right now, I'm also in my Barbra Streisand era. I watch Funny Girl once a week because I just love it that much. That soundtrack is playing on a loop in my head. And I found it so fascinating that in 1975, Barbra Streisand came to Elvis directly. She wanted him for A Star Is Born, a prestige film, a comeback vehicle, the story of a fading star that Elvis was by then kind of living in real time. She wanted him for the lead. It was perhaps the single most perfectly matched role that could have been offered to him at that precise moment in his life. Thinking about Elvis in that movie gives me goosebumps, absolute goosebumps. But of course, Colonel Parker basically said no. This man is the devil in disguise, for a better word. There was no passport excuse this time because the film was shooting in the US, so this was just pure control. Parker didn't want Elvis doing anything that wasn't filtered through him. And so Chris Christopherson was offered the part, and the film became a cultural event that's still impacting pop culture today. And Elvis, who had proven 17 years earlier in King Creole that he could carry exactly that kind of dramatic weight, watched from afar. Steve Binder, who directed the 1968 comeback special and watched Elvis come alive again in front of a live audience, put it plainly. Elvis made a pact with the devil, and he didn't know how to get out of it. And Elvis himself, he knew, and he saw it with complete clarity what Hollywood thought of him. And in his own words, I know I'm a joke in this town. And that's where we'll leave it. No resolution because there wasn't one. Just the distance between what was and what might have been, and the man standing in that space to this very day.